Hi, Christy.
Hi, Jeff.
We're recording now.
The many hours of conversation you and I have had, we've had probably half of them that haven't been recorded.
You know what we should do? We should start a podcast.
You think? Let's call it The Why and the Buy.
All right. Christy, we're back. Part 2. Are you excited?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. This conversation with Chad Harrison has just been amazing. So I know if you listen to the first episode, you're going to love this wrap up with him. He has so many gems, and I promise you, we're going to have some trending hashtags from these.
This is a deep, deep topic, and if you haven't listened to the first part of this conversation, go back. If you're a brand new listener this week, do yourself a favor, pause this recording right now, go back, listen to the first part of this conversation, because you're going to need to be up to speed. We're only scratching the surface here, but you're going to want to definitely listen to all of it. So we'd love to hear from you on your thoughts. Reach us at info@thewhyandthebuy.com or thewhyandthebuy@gmail.com if you choose to go that route, and tell us what you think. Can't wait to touch base with you, and here's the rest of the interview. So, Chad, you just said a 4-letter word. I mean, the word has got way more than 4 letters in it, but micromanagement, I can hear our listeners shivering with chills down their spine right now as we speak. Why did you go there?
Your audience, I think, mostly does with sales, right? And so at the end of the day, people get into sales for what reason? We get into sales because we like managing our own schedule. We like being able to go where we want to go. We like being able to have the type of conversations when we want to have them. And so autonomy is a huge part of the sales world, I think, that attracts a lot of people to that type of work. At the end of the day, when people feel like that, when any employee, whether they're in sales or not, when they lack control and it's her perception or his perception that control triggers this uncertainty of my own status, going back to that, then it rises the stress levels. And at the end of the day, we do more in our behavior to avoid that stress than we do actually closing the deal.
You know what's really interesting? I noticed this. It's been several years since I noticed this, but I sell more effectively, more comfortably, and quite frankly, more effectively when I know that I had cleared my quota. When I hit that number, I knew that all bets were off, and I didn't have anybody else to really report to. If I could hit that number by the 19th or the 20th, I had 10 days at the end of the month where it was just so much fun to do what I did. I was more creative. I had much more flow about me. I had much more swagger about me because, hey, what are they going to do? I did everything they asked me to. Now I'm going to see how far I can push this thing. And my best selling came at that time because, you know what? And I had worked for some micromanagers. I'd worked for some less than micromanagers. But once I felt like I had those hurdles cleared, I felt like I became a more authentic, more effective version of myself. And to me, I started thinking about, well, why don't I always act that way? And I think it's really hard because as much as we don't like to be micromanagers, that flies in the face of most salespeople being people pleasers at the same time, which is one of the things that makes us effective at what we do and good at what we do. But I've always thought as my managers as my customers too. So how do you balance that? That's really interesting that it's kind of come in this direction.
Yeah, and I think at the end of the day, what you're really talking about is the ultimate definition of discretionary effort. And that is when you have discretionary effort, people do what they do, their behavior, because they want to do it. So what you described was you move beyond the need to have to do something, what we call compliance. And you moved into an area of sales where you wanted to do it because now it was for you. It wasn't for someone else. And I think that's really important. And the more we can tap into that, the more that we can leverage, how do we get people to do things because they want to do, whether that's the environment we create or how we structure their compensation package or how we structure how we manage them, then I think we get the benefit. So quite frankly, what I'm saying is that the business case for this type of work is that when you can tap into discretionary effort, you don't leave it on the table. And as you probably saw, when you were using discretionary to sales, your sales probably were 10 times higher than when where you felt like you were under the gun.
Oh yeah, it was way better.
Yeah, so we lose all that as business. We lose all that income potential, revenue potential, because we're forcing something into compliance.
Wow. I think we all can relate to that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Which leads me to relatedness, Jeff.
But I'm bummed.
Right. This was always been a very interesting one to me, and I'll describe it this way, as I have before to other leaders. Have you ever been walking in the grocery aisle and you look out of the corner of your eye and you notice someone, and in that moment you think you know them, but you're not quite sure, and it just kind of aggs on you until, if you're like me and kind of weird and socially awkward from time to time, find a reason to bump into their cart because you just want to start a conversation to see if they are who you think they are. And the moment that you realize it is that person, what happens inside? This instantaneous burst of relatedness. I now know that you are that person. And immediately the conversation goes into remember when, and you start to think about all the things that you experience in life together. That, in a nutshell, is relatedness. And what's important about that is that what we figured out through Dr. David Brock's work is that the threat response goes away when we feel like that we are in good company with people that we can relate to, people that we can feel like we have something in common with. And because of that, what happens is a burst of reward. We have some commonality. We don't feel judged. We don't feel awkward. And we have a sense, going back to certainty, about who that person is and what they're about and how that relates to us. So it's a very important part. And this really is a very important one because I think in my mind, it really to a large extent describes just how social we are as beings, regardless of your personality type.
You know, it's really interesting and randomly quite timely. A couple of years ago, almost to the day, I lost an uncle. And he was an uncle who kind of married my aunt later in life. And we knew him and we loved him, but there was so much about him that we didn't know because he wasn't there, you know, from birth, per se, for me and for most of my cousins. And so at the service, hearing people talk about him, and at the wake, hearing people speak of him, and understanding that they felt exactly the way about him that we felt about him, all of a sudden, the mood in the entire room changed. And we all talked about that. My wife and I specifically, driving home and just like, wow, isn't that so cool to have all of those feelings validated by people who you have never met before, but who had the same feelings and felt the same way about this man that we loved very dearly. And now all of a sudden we felt even more connected to those people because we had him in common. And and I only bring that up because it's so, weirdly timely in this case. But that relatability is, it's the key to building rapport. And it's one of those things where I think it's an underrated key to building rapport because it can be so dramatic so quickly.
And I think Dr. David Brock has a good statement in the article, Christy, that I shared with you. And in that he says, underneath this particular topic, he says, with the brain in mind, the ability to feel trust and empathy about others is shaped by whether they are perceived to be a part of the same social group. What you just described was, although you were related in the real sense of the matter, you entered into a new form of social group, and that was the commonality you have around your uncle. What's so really interesting about this to me is that if you think about sales, don't we sell better to the people we really relate to?
No question.
Oh, yeah. And the people we can talk their language and everything else. Yeah. Doesn't relatedness also have a negative side?
It can have a negative side. Conversely, there's a threat response that can be triggered in people or aroused in people if they feel cut off from the group. So, and this is where and that word intentional comes back to my mind, and such a cornerstone of my business Vantage leadership development, because I really want leaders to be very intentional, those keen observers that I shared with you earlier, Christy, that I think is very important. Because sometimes what happens is, whether we realize it or not, because of the way we're interacting with one of our direct reports, and let's say the peer of that direct report is seeing that interaction, unintentionally, they can feel left out, not a part of that close group. This is where we get the idea of playing employee favorites from. People perceive it. It may not be our intention, but it happens. So I have that favorite salesperson that I always go do ride-alongs with. And what happens is the perception of being removed or outside of that social group can have as strong as a threat response as it does a reward response when you feel like you're in the group.
Wow. That's a tough one.
It is. But that's a great point, Christie, because I mean, it can work both ways. And I think what we're getting at here, and this is what's kind of blowing my mind, is we are putting words together in this acronym, this SCARF acronym, that is really kind of providing a vocabulary for some of these feelings that I think most of us who've been selling for a long time will be able to recognize, but could never quite put a word to, could never quite identify with. How do we codify what is going on here? And I am so into this conversation because this is a lot of the nuance that I feel that I've always been able to kind of pick up on, but not be able to identify, let alone be able to teach to anybody. And, you know, Chad, what you're able to do and bring to our audience here is just spectacular. I mean, so what do we do with this, right? I mean, we talked a little bit about fairness and the perception of it, and just listen, my 8-year-old has a completely different opinion of fair than my 6-year-old even does, right? So, I mean, it's fair to say that it's all very subjective and perceptive, but I mean, how does a manager handle this? I mean, do you then go and do you hire for a specific personality type? I know companies who do that, and you can just manage them all the same way. Or do you hire really tremendous and dynamic managers who know how to handle different personality types? Because chameleons like that are really hard to find. Now that we've been talking about this, it's out there. You can't run from it. You can't just stop the podcast and pretend you didn't hear it. Run away with your, fingers in your ears. La, 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 right? I mean, what do we do with this bomb you just dropped on us, Chad?
Well, I think therein lies the challenge of every leader, and it's all about intentionality again. What I really like about this concept of SCARF is even the image of it. You know, when you think about a scarf in itself, you take it off and you put it around you, and you put it around you for what reason? That idea is to warm yourself, to brace yourself from the cold weather, if you will. Managers, in a lot of sense, are doing the exact same thing, but doing it relationally or doing it socially. They are learning how to. If you can think about the SCARF acronym as being 5 triggers. They are intentionally, when a manager really has let this really sink into who they are and how they lead, they are intentionally flipping switches when the need is there on all 5 of these. Look, it is unrealistic at the end of the day to say that every leader, every manager can provide all 5 factors of SCARF at all times to all employees. It's just not going to happen. We've even talked about unintentionally, we can have our best intentions out there, but unintentionally we'll do something that triggers a threat response and we don't even know it. So the idea is that life is going to happen. And when it does happen and you do trigger a threat response, if you have this concept in mind, let's just say as an example, if I'm going to make an organizational decision, very common today as we get pressures for overhead, delivering bottom line numbers, and try to be more effective in our organizational design, we do a lot of reorganization. Well, reorganization, as you can imagine, can trigger a lot of threat response to a lot of people. Some of them we don't even know are threats. And so the idea is that now I've taken away that sense of certainty. They didn't have the opportunity in their own autonomy to make that decision, right? And so since I've taken that autonomy away from them, and I've taken some sense of the future and the certainty about that away from them, what can I do to actually push the lever of certainty back up? Well, maybe I can be very specific about the details of that org change, or when that's going to happen, or who that's actually going to affect, or the timing of it. All of that becomes really important. And as leaders, we need to learn to flip these levers as we see that they are being taken out of control or flipped unknowingly by others, and try to flip them intentionally so that we can drive that discretionary effort back up, that engagement back up with those employees.
Yeah, I love that. You know, there's several words that we've thrown out. I mean, outside of what we're hashtagging with discretionary effort and predictive trust, there are a lot of words that we've thrown out that I think really hone in on what the manager or leader needs to focus on. Intentionality, I think you've mentioned multiple times, it's all about having the right intentions in the first place, because you cannot mask that behavior otherwise. Being transparent in all of your dealings with your employees. That doesn't mean that you're sharing state secrets. It just means that you're being transparent with the things that are important to your employees. Having empathy and understanding where people are on this spectrum of where their status, their certainty, their autonomy, their relatedness, or their fairness, or their perception of those 5 elements. And then finally, communicate. Right? I mean, I think that's those are the key elements. If I kind of break this down into a handful of words that seem to come out as far as what the leader needs to do to produce the right effect on the employee.
Yeah, Chrissy, it's about, I think, putting even the analogy of the glasses of scarf on, so moving away from scarf, but looking through the lens, right? Looking through the lens of threat and reward. And it's almost like, glasses have 2 lenses in them. And you can look at everybody's interaction just that same way. One lens being threat, one lens being reward. And if we can see the world in that way, I think it really helps leaders to practice that intentionality, to interpret the interaction in such a way to say, okay, did I trigger a threat response? And if I did I intend to do that? If I didn't, then how can I go back and look at these levers of SCARF in order to re-engage that person in a way that drives their performance and their engagement and commitment to the organization. Dr. Rock talked about in the last section of that article I've shared with you, he talked about business organizations are really good examples of how we do it wrong a lot of times. And we create massive amount of uncertainty in the organization, even unintentionally. The difference for me is that when a leader can be attuned to these SCARF principles, putting the glasses on, so to speak, they can then therefore reduce that uncertainty in other people's employment experience by intentionally trying to make creating certainty the first order of their business, creating the opportunity of that they matter status, a first part of their business, of trying to connect them with other people and team members in a way where they feel like they have some type of relatedness, their first order of business, to remove the red tape as needed, and to realize that people are adults, and they make bad decisions, and we have to manage that as we have opportunity to do that. But at the end of the day, they need the autonomy to make decisions over their work, so they feel like they can have control over what they do. And finally, when all that goes wrong and we have to make a decision, and sometimes they don't like that decision, we're not asking them to agree with it. But here's what I know about people. People don't have to say that I want you to agree with me, but they have to know that you heard them. And that's where fairness really comes in. That I take the time to explain in a way that's open and vulnerable, to share the rationale and the logic behind the decision. I'm not asking you to come to the same conclusion of agreement that I did, but at least by me sharing it, you have an understanding of it. And I think that makes a world of a difference. So if leaders make their first priority of how they do their job of leadership through the glasses of SCARF, and I think it will be so much more impactful. And at the end of the day, they'll get better results out of it. And most importantly, people can walk away feeling good about what they do.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Chad, we should be friends.
We are friends, Jeff. What are you talking about?
So I know what we need to do is we need to work on more managers recognizing this discomfort and this lack of certainty. That's where that other thing comes in. And I'm not even holding that against a lot of managers. Sometimes those managers are up against such incredible odds with so many things that they're being asked to do that they can't even do the things that they need to do, that they know they need to do in order to feel successful. So that, I mean, there's a lot of places we can go with this, but...
Well, we've all heard of the, Jeff, we've all heard of the depositing in the trust account, right? This is very similar in that way. And I think what managers can do is walk away from their day and ask themselves a very introspective question. And that is, did I create more reward than I did threat today? And if the answer to that is yes, then they're leading in the right way.
Wow.
Yeah, we'll leave it at that one because that was perfect.
So we ask a couple of questions of all of our guests, Chad, but what are you reading right now? There's probably War and Peace or Chomsky, or like there's got to be something with a lot of pages in it. That's what I'm guessing.
Well, right now I'm reading for another certification that I'm doing. I'm reading Dangerous Opportunity. And it's all about change management process, and really interesting concept that allows us to think about that people approach change very differently because of who they are and how they're wired to think about change and personal transition. And there's an appreciation for all of them. One's no better than the other, and we need them in the organization. It's been very interesting just in having dialogue with my own wife about, well, what are you and what am I? Are you a conservator? Or are you a pragmatist? Are you an originator? And it's really interesting that, if it hadn't been for some of those conservators, we probably wouldn't have got a lot done. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, if it hadn't been a lot for those originators, we wouldn't have the innovation that we have today. So it's really about the appreciation of that spectrum and how to use it in the workplace.
Cool.
Nice.
Dangerous Opportunity.
I might have to go check that one out.
Yeah, just add that to the list of mine.
So Chad, we always ask our guests one question, and that's, what is your why?
It's the whole reason I started my business, Vantage Leadership Solutions. I'm a hiker, and I love to hike. I do a lot of backpacking. Last year, the Centennial of the Parks, I put in 100 miles last year. And what I really love about it is just not only the cool gear that you can buy, because I'm a gear geek, but it's the interpersonal insight that you gain in the process of doing something hard. And I really like that. And so if you look at my business card, my logo has a mountain on it. And here's why it resonates for me. And I'll get to my why. And that is, what I love about planning a hike or backpacking is the planning that goes into it. The anticipation of it. What am I going to see? What do I need with me? The balance of, do I take junk with me or just the essentials? I mean, that whole introspective challenge of preparation, I think is essentially important. And it's really something that I think in life we should be asking ourselves the question: what do we need to pack more of, and what do we need to take out of the pack? But what I really like also is that when you're on the journey, so you've anticipated it, right? And you're doing the hike now and you're on the journey, it's the cool things you didn't expect that you come up on. It's the bear that walks across the path. It's the person that you meet that you realize is from the same hometown, but yet you're both thousands of miles away from each other in that hometown. It's the discovery, if you will, that really makes the process of the journey alive. What I really like about that is that it really makes every hike very unique. And then finally, there's nothing like standing on top of a mountain peak that you work your butt off to get there. And you look down and you realize where you came from and what it took to get you here, all the planning, all the journey. And that breeds perspective. And looking up at a mountain is completely different than looking down from a mountain. Oh. And so what I really love about all of that, metaphor and how I base my business off of it was that is so true to who we are as humans and so true to who we are as leaders. We should be working our butt off, anticipating the journey, planning, and thinking about the impact that we can make. And that ultimately leads to asking the question, what do I need to unpack? And what do I need to pack? And it also helps us, when we're on the journey, appreciate the journey for every journey and what it is, the people that we'll meet, the things that we learn about ourselves, Thomas the Train and all I think I can going up the mountain, just pushing yourself to do things more than what you thought you can achieve a lot more. And I think that builds a sense of confidence. But at the end of the day, when you get done with all of that, leadership is ultimately about legacy. And standing on the mountaintop and looking at the perspective of what you were able to accomplish as a leader behind you, what you've left behind, is going to make the journey so much more worth it. So my why is all of that. It's all of taking leaders on a journey so they can gain perspective, they can anticipate, they can learn more about themselves, but ultimately, at the end of the day, so they can feel really good about their mark on the world, and they know what they know, and they know what they need to leave behind for the next person.
Wow.
Amazing.
Well said. Well
Yes.
said. So how can our listeners get a hold of you?
Absolutely. Well, the best way to get a hold of me is just a straight up email address, chad.harrison@vantage-ls.com. It would be straight up emails directly to me. Love to hear from you. Love to talk to you. Website's still being worked on. So, vantageLS.com would be where we're headed, but that's under construction right now. So if you go from there, you're not going to find it. So I think that's probably the best way to get a hold of me right now. Give me a day or two, depending on what part of the world I'm in, to respond back to you.
I just didn't know if you wanted to give us a home address or, just something a little more personal than an email. No, I'm just
Yeah. I'm going to show up. I'm going to show up and go fly fishing with you.
Hey, love it. That's another passion. Don't get me started on that one. But yeah, they absolutely could get a hold of me that way. Love to hear from them. Love to talk to them, and love to help them in any way I can with my business.
That's awesome. Chad, thank you so much for your time. So, Jeff, you can understand why I was so stoked about getting him on the podcast. And I think you're coming back. I'm just going to make that prediction right now.
Giddy. I need to wrap my brain around all this stuff. This is really great. They're tremendous, Chad. Thank you so much for being a part of this and being here. And we look forward to talking again.
That's awesome.
Pleasure, guys. I really appreciate the opportunity. And thanks for what you're doing for the sales folks out there. They need this. They need that connection. And Christie, what can I say? You're a great friend, and looking forward to having class with you again in the near future.
Yeah. Next week, actually.
Well, Christie, Chad sounds like someone who knows his why. And I know that when someone knows their why, their hows and their whats get a whole lot better. So hopefully our listeners know that too, and they'll tune in again with us next week when we have another fantastic guest. Or is it just going to be us? It might just be us next week. It doesn't matter. Come join us again. Give us a ring, drop us a line. If you like what we're doing, tell us, and we'll be talking to you again soon.
Bye, everybody.
Hey, thanks for listening to us on the Why and the Buy podcast. If you like us, tell us. Send us a message at the Why and the Buy on Twitter, or leave us a 5-star review on iTunes or wherever you got this podcast. We'd love to hear from you. Talk to you next week. How about the music on this podcast? We call them our house band, they call themselves Haskins, and they're based out of Plymouth, Michigan. If you want to hear more from them, go to haskinsmusic.com and check them out.
You're listening to the Podcast Detroit Network. Visit www.podcastdetroit.com for more information.